This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network. Of course, a big thanks goes out to our regular contributor, Chris, as we start a brand new series today on the East Rail 177 trilogy. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen going and get many great benefits. Go over to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more. A special thanks goes out to our executive producer, Alex. More about the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like James Early's Key Battles of American History podcast, can be found at parthenonpodcast.com. And of course, you can learn more about Beyond the Big Screen and great movies and stories so great they should be movies by going over to our website, a2zhistorypage.com. Links to all of this and more can be found in the show notes as well. I thank you for joining me again, Beyond the Big Screen. I'd like to welcome Chris back to the show yet again. Today, we're going to start a mini series of sorts based on the M. Night Shyamalan East Rail 177 trilogy. These are 3 films in a set. We have Unbreakable from 2000, which we will discuss today, Split from 2016, and then Glass from 2019. These are 3 incredible films, and they each stand on their own, really, but when you put them together, they are truly great. They are nominally in the superhero genre, but each movie completely smashes the superhero genre and builds it back to what, what the genre should really be about. Stories of morals, ambiguity, and humanity. So thank you for joining us on this adventure. Now, Unbreakable is the story of the discovery of an unlikely superhero, the mild-mannered, depressed security guard David Dunn, portrayed by Bruce Willis. Now, before to set the whole stage for the whole series and everything, Chris, what do you think of the superhero genre, with the Marvel and DC universes and the kind of the commercialization that both of these have seen in film and TV?
Yeah, look, I read comics growing up a bit. Like, I enjoyed Batman and Superman, a little bit of X-Men. I got a little bit older, I started reading The Punisher, but I never really got super into reading comic books. And yeah, and in terms of the movies, I don't know, I had kind of have a love-hate relationship with the whole comic book movie universe, I guess. The Marvel ones, I don't know, they don't really do much for me. They're fun popcorn movies, I suppose, and they obviously have an audience that really enjoys them, but I find with a lot of the Marvel movies, I'm just kind of watching the same movie again and again and again. And I guess people enjoy them like that because you go into the movie and you know exactly what to expect, but it's not really how I enjoy watching movies. I like going into a movie and not knowing exactly what to expect in terms of the story and style and decisions that the director chose. The DC movies, though, I enjoy those a little bit more, especially the Nolan Batmans. I thought the recent Joker with Joaquin Phoenix was a pretty cool take on the comic book villain, and even Zack Snyder's Superman I really enjoyed, and his Batman versus Superman. I haven't seen the Snyder cut of the Justice League. I didn't really like the Justice League that originally came out. It was, you could just tell that the studio was heavily involved, and Zack Snyder didn't really get to make his movies. But I find with the DC movies, going into them, I don't know what to expect really. And I find generally the DC properties tend to take the material a little bit more seriously. It's not so tongue in cheek.
You know what I think is The Marvel movies, I never really got into them. I think like you said, when I was younger, I read the comic books of the X-Men to a certain degree. And the first movie, though, even that very first one that came out, that might have been in the 90s or so, with Captain Picard as Dr. X. And I think it was Max von Sydow was Magneto. It was good. I mean, it wasn't spectacular or anything. I think the DC, though, they've done something more interesting. I think, like, even if you go back all the way to the Michael Keaton Batman, you watch it now and it's kind of comical, but back then that was a seriously dark movie going into that whole genre of superheroes. And I think you see what they did with the Wonder Woman. They took it a little bit more seriously, I think, than the Marvel does. The Marvel is all video games and explosions.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's the best way I can put it, is like I find for the most part, they take the subject matter seriously and less tongue in cheek. Like Marvel, it always seems like it's just, I don't know, it's one liner after another. And at no point do I feel like the people involved in the movie or the directors involved in the movie really seem to take the subject matter with any kind of seriousness. It's almost like they're just kind of building, a thrill ride, right? Which is, I guess that's fine if that's what you're in the mood for, but it's not really my cup of tea.
Now, I think it's a really good time to start talking about what is a superhero, because we get very different versions of superheroes throughout these different comic books. You have Superman and ones like him who are indestructible and they can fly and all these things. But then you have Batman, who's essentially just some guy with cool gadgets. It's kind of the same thing with Tony Stark and Iron Man. How do you go about defining superhero?
I guess somebody who has superhuman talents, right? Me and you were discussing this when we were talking about this movie Unbreakable, and like I have a different kind of take on what like a superhero could be. Like to me, somebody like Mozart is a superhero. Who has say talent for music. It almost seems like it's not of this world to a degree. Like this talent was given to him from God. And if you read Mozart, like right from a young age, he showed like an incredible talent for music. And it goes like just beyond talent for music, what he was able to do with music and the amount of people that he was able to positively affect in their lives and inspire them to create music themselves. It almost comes across as a godlike ability.
Yeah, the real basic overview of the movie is, well, before we even talk about that, to me, that when you come up with that idea that one person is really special and talented and they change everything, it comes up to the great man theory. And yeah, sure, there are great men, but we're putting that on them. If Mozart's music, it very well could have not been appreciated. I think a lot of confluence of factors come together to make someone rise to the top, an individual, despite their great talents or, half a dozen other factors, hard work and talent. It still takes something extra for someone to rise to the top.
Yeah, the great man theory of history was, if your audience is not familiar with it, was kind of coined by a Scottish author and critic, Thomas Carlyle. And it's not very popular now. The way to interpret history nowadays is like trends and forces and various other things. But Thomas Carlyle kind of had this interesting theory of history where it was these epoch-making great men that changed the whole reality of the world around them, or they had a vision of what the world could be or should be, and changed everything, changed the entire world around them to fit that vision. And it's only been like a couple of people that have been able to accomplish this, right? Thomas Carlyle, if I'm trying to remember, he had a book like Heroes and Hero Worship, and he had, I believe it was like Odin was on was on this list. Muhammad, Napoleon, people that were, as soon as they showed up on the scene, they were like a force of nature and basically bent the entire world to their will. And you could argue that these type of great men are, in a sense, like superheroes. Does that make sense to you?
I just think, I don't know. I think it's kind of a stretch. And I think that's a topic we can really pull apart, I think, when we start talking about the movie. And really the basics of the movie are that this, as usual, spoiler alerts, but basically this person, David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, he's kind of a Joe Schmo. He's a security guard, I think, at Penn University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It could have been Temple. I'm not sure which one it was, but he's a security guard, and he doesn't feel he's necessarily living up to his potential. It's ruining his relationship with his kid. It's ruining his relationship with his wife. He just always, and the movie kind of shows it out through some flashback scenes, that he's just somebody who is not particularly happy with his place in life. I think a really good first place to go with this is, do you think that David always knew he was somebody special? Is that what you got from the movie?
Yeah, the movie kind of plays with it a bit, like how much David actually knows. But I think David always knew that he was more than just your average human, right? Like at one point in the movie, he's asking his wife, like, "Have you ever seen me sick before? Have you?" And she says, like, "Oh, I can't remember." And I think that's like something maybe David he's just kind of pushing that kind of stuff under the rug. Like he's just, like whatever, it's not a big deal. It's just abnormal, I guess. But then there's like other things where we know that David knows that he survived this car crash that he has with his wife, and he wasn't injured. So he knows this about himself. And you mentioned his depression. And I think part of his depression is the fact that he feels like he has to hide this aspect of himself. So basically his entire life, he really hasn't been able to, truthfully be himself.
It really, to me, I've watched this movie probably 10 times over the 20 years. It was 22 years or more that it was released. And they dropped some lines in there that the wife doesn't like football. Like his son was playing football, and David comes and says that the mom doesn't like it. And so what I'm thinking is David quit playing football and feigned this injury after the car accident to appease his wife, which they weren't even dating at that point. That's, to me, that kind of confused me. That whole, why does he fake this injury and throw away his football career?
I think it was because he did love Audrey. And I think he looked, and Mr. Glass points this out, as he looks at his football career, and maybe he can do it for, like most football players, maybe 10 years, whereas love is everlasting. So if he can, fake an injury, he gets out of football and he can, be in love with Audrey. But in the process of doing that, he's hiding who he truly is to Audrey. He's also having to hide it from himself. So he can't really truly be himself.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. I kind of think that part where he rips the door off of the car is the first time he realized that he had this strength in him, that he throttled himself back his whole life. And another scene that they flash back to that he doesn't even remember is that he almost dies in the pool. And I think that those things kind of added up to that he almost subconsciously repressed himself and what he knew about himself. Like, he didn't really know, had I ever been sick? I think that wasn't a rhetorical question. I think it was just something he never thought of.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, that's exactly what I think is. Like, there was I think he pushed a bunch of stuff to the side, but I think deep down he knew, because he clearly remembers exactly what happened on the night of the car crash. I think he deep down he knew that he was more than just human. I don't know if he knew for sure that he might have just thought he got lucky in that car crash. I don't know for sure if he thought like he couldn't get hurt or couldn't die. Or, he can die, but was almost kind of like a Superman. I don't know if he knew that for sure, but it doesn't take much prodding from Mr. Glass for David to start, investigating whether he is what Mr. Glass is saying that he is.
The opening scene of the movie, David is on a train coming back from New York, where he's going on a job interview because his plan is to leave his wife and his kid in Philadelphia and then move to New York City. And he's taking the East Rail 177, the Amtrak from New York City to Philadelphia. And the train crashes and everybody on there dies except for David. And I think it's very well played in the beginning. You don't really think about it. You think that maybe it is just pure luck.
Yeah, that was a cool thing that they did throughout the movie. There's like a couple instances of it where like David at the initial train crash, you think, oh, maybe it's just kind of luck, right? Because this is just personal. Going into this movie, I didn't know much about it. I knew it had something. It was my first time watching it, and I knew it had something to do with comic books because I've heard people talk about it, but I didn't really know. Like, I thought that was the twist, but that we'll get into that later. But so it plays with this idea of whether David is actually like a superhero or not. There's the scene too with his kid pulls a gun out on him and says like nothing's going to happen to you. And I was like I genuinely felt a little suspense because I don't like, is the kid going to pull the trigger and David's, going to start spilling blood everywhere or not? I didn't know for sure. I had a feeling that he was more than just, maybe there was something going on, but I didn't know for sure. They did it very well in the movie.
At each step, Shyamalan gives us just a little bit more. And it really isn't until almost the end of the movie that it all comes together. I think when you watch it on your first blush, at that point with the shooting or where the son pulls the gun on him, you almost think, I can remember watching it. I think I watched it in the theater thinking that, David is just, because by that point, David and Audrey are starting to reconnect. And I think that David just starts feeling better about himself and having I guess maybe a little more self-esteem or something like that, where, and then, so when the kid pulls the gun on him, I genuinely thought that it was really that the son just had this idea that his father was a superhero and that David was just playing it when he says that, oh, shoot me and I'll be fine, but I'm going to leave. I thought that he was just acting that out to get the gun away from the kid.
That's actually, if I hadn't known that it had something to do with comic books, that's exactly what I probably would have thought. I would have thought this is like you're seeing like the fantasy of what would have been a mentally disturbed child because of the shaky household that he grew up in, because you see that Audrey and David's relationship isn't all the greatest.
Yeah, I think too that feeding in with Mr. Glass, who's played by Robin Wright plays Audrey, and then Samuel L. Jackson portrays as Mr. Glass. And I just think that, Samuel L. Jackson's a great actor, but I think that this was so, especially in the time period, and even in the future movies he's in, he plays such a different character than he's ever played. But he does it. It's masterful.
Yeah, he plays it brilliantly. Like this, he pulls off the supervillain perfectly, and like especially the way, like I don't know how much say he had on what he dressed up as and what he wore, but his outfits were like spectacular. I thought they were amazing.
But you can really see that when Mr. Glass starts Elijah is also known as, when Elijah slash Mr. Glass, when he starts to court David, that he, again, your first blush is that he's just a psychotic, that he's broken, literally broken, that he has this birth defect where his bones can't heal properly, and his bones are all easily broken. And you just think that this guy is shattered mentally and physically, and he wants David to be something that he's not.
Well, and the first time you see him too, like, well, one of the first times is he runs like an art gallery, but that specializes in selling, I guess, antique comic book portraits, right?
Yeah, and artsy comic books.
Yeah, like he's like, I guess he would. I guarantee something like this exists nowadays because of just the way comic book stuff is taken off. But yeah, and this guy goes in there and he's gonna go buy some portrait, some piece of art, and he mentions like, oh yeah, my kid's gonna love this, and Mr. Glass just freaks out, saying like, oh, do you see Teletubbies? Do you see cheese pizza? Or I can't remember exactly what he says. Like, this isn't for children. And the guy had good money. He was gonna buy the portrait, but Mr. Glass wasn't gonna sell it to somebody just to give it to their kid. So he kicks him out of the store. I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was really good. I think it's the way they built the characters in this, especially the way they built up Mr. Glass. I think that you get the idea that he's eccentric, and then it just keeps building from there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So where do you want to go from here?
I think maybe I'll kick off to explain Mr. Glass. I think we should talk about his plan and how that coaxes David out. So
okay, that sounds good.
Tell us a little bit about what we learn about Elijah and what his plan is for David.
Oh yeah, so we find out that Mr. Glass, like I believe it's the opening shot of the movie. He suffers from like some debilitating disease. I'm not exactly sure what the word is, but his bones are glass, right? That's what he gets called Mr. Glass. So if he like bumps into something hard enough, not even just kind of bumps into stuff, his legs will break, his arms will break, his bones are made of glass. So Mr. Glass has this theory from reading comic books and being well read. He's a genius. That if he's on this one end of the spectrum, that somebody else has to be on the opposite end of the spectrum from where he is. And he has this plan where he's going to basically do domestic terrorist attacks around the country to try to find this person that is on the opposite end of the spectrum. We find out that he was responsible for a Boeing crash and an apartment building, I guess a high-rise apartment building. He set that on fire, and everyone dies in these accidents. And he's also responsible for the train crash that David was on. And Mr. Glass ends up finding that David could potentially be the guy that's on the other end of the spectrum because he survived the train crash and was not hurt. So he leaves a little note on David's car asking him to see him this is like how twisted Mr. Glass is. He does this at what I guess is like a mass funeral for all the people that died in the train crash, and David attended that. And he lays out his theory about superheroes to David, saying that he believes that comic books are just like representations of history, of things that people felt or saw at one point in history. And me and you were talking about this in terms of stuff like myths, people like Zeus, Odin, Thor, Seth, Roth, you name them, right? And me and you were discussing this back and forth about Mr. Glass's theory. If I'm understanding it correctly, Mr. Glass believes that at one point somebody like Zeus did exist, and stuff has been added to it. But at one point there was this superhuman Zeus that people, either saw or they felt the presence of and wrote stories about. And comic books are just kind of the continuation of this. And he says to David that you could potentially be one of these types of people.
I think that's an interesting point to bring up, that that maybe there was at points in the history of people who weren't just maybe they were way outside of the ordinary, and then that piles on and piles on, that you have certain people who are so spectacular that people remember them, but as time it goes on, more and more gets piled on to them of their the great deeds that they've done. I think Hercules is one that comes to mind. I just wonder, I don't know if Elijah thought about David in that way, or if he thought he was literally a superhero. That's what he's looking for, is people straight out of his comic books.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's not 100% clear about it, because he talks about how, like, in the early comic books, like, the superpowers themselves were not like super glossy. They weren't super over the top. There's actually a line in the movie too about how in the original Superman, like, Superman didn't actually fly. So he might think that Zeus was, just as an example, that Zeus was a superhero in history, and it's been pizzazzed up over time, right? Like, he's throwing lightning bolts out of the sky, and he lives on the top of this mountain, and what have you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think going back to that, yeah, I mean, if you look into read books about the Indo-Europeans, there's the I think it's called The Wheel, the Horse and the Cart or something. The name of the author escapes me, but it was a really comprehensive look at the archaeology and a lot of the sociology of what they knew about the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And going back all the way back then, there was an idea of the hero and doing things to be heroic. And I just wonder, in this day and age, what does it mean to be a hero? Because I think that that's a term that gets kind of thrown around a little loosely. And I think that it's a lot different than what people in the past would have viewed as what a hero is.
Yeah, I would say, and also, like, the definition of a hero, like, exactly what is a hero. Like, people typically think of a hero as, somebody comes in, they save the damsel in distress, or, they lead great armies, or, they think like King Leonidas, right? But I would argue too that a hero is somebody also who creates, great works of art. Homer to me is a hero. Goethe is a hero. Shakespeare is a hero. These are the types of people that they bring forth their art, in this case art, their artistic vision into the world, and it's never the same after.
Don't you think, though, that being heroic has to have some sort of bravery attached to it? Like, I mean, for an example, is the greatest accountant in the world who has, almost mystical powers of being able to understand numbers. Is he a hero? To me, I think of bravery as having something to do with it.
That is, but I would say somebody like Adam Smith, right? You brought up an accountant, it made me think of Adam Smith, like an economist. I would say that he would fall under as if we're broad. I'm using the definition of hero pretty broadly too, though, right? And I would say, like, somebody like Adam Smith is a hero. He would be considered, I don't know, part of like the heroic realm. Like, say we're in Valhalla. Adam Smith would be probably in Valhalla.
But by what definition? That's what I'm trying to understand, because to me, I just can't break away some act of bravery over just being talented and good at something. I think that all of those people are admirable, but there's got to be something that separates somebody who's talented, great, maybe almost supernatural in their talent from a hero.
I suppose I'm thinking about it right now. I'll use an example. I don't know, say in in the same vein that I was talking earlier, I say somebody like Mozart, right? Is it not heroic the and brave the amount of time that he dedicated to his music?
I mean, presumably he's doing what he likes, though. And is he doing that? Is he taking chances to, I mean, is Mozart, somebody like Mozart or Adam Smith, are they taking real chances to further something or to save other people's lives? And I guess that's where I'm coming from with heroic. You can be a Joe Schmo or a Jane Schmo who bursts into a building that's on fire to save someone. I mean, not even just a fireman or a cop, but anybody can do that. To me, that's heroic. That's brave. That's putting yourself on the line for someone else. And really, you could say society. Is somebody exercising their talent heroic?
I'll use another example that just came to me right now. What about Dante? You know, if you believe Dante, his like him descending into hell was visions that he had. So he took this journey for us and created this masterful work of art. And I'm sure it was not a happy process to literally kind of dive into hell to give us a better image of, you know, what sin really does to someone.
I don't know the exact story of his writing. It sounded like he had a lot of ideas, but it's still he's writing something and he's putting out there. And I guess there's a bravery of sort that he wrote it in the vernacular of Tuscany, and he didn't write the book in Latin. And it still, is that heroic? Is that somebody who, I guess, I mean, what we're quibbling over is the definition of heroism. And you seem to be taking a maximalist approach to it, where I keep getting drawn back into the superhero, the person who's fighting for maybe something more concrete than just talent or knowledge, or, you know, essentially doing their job.
Well, like we'll use an example from Unbreakable. And I would argue that both Mr. Glass and David are both heroic people, but at pretty much opposite ends of the spectrum. Whereas David is the type of person, and we see in the movie, he breaks into a house that a serial killer had broken into and saves two little girls, right? That would fit more clearly what you think of like a heroic archetype, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because David didn't have to do that. He didn't have to put himself on the line. So I kind of feel like something heroic is bravery, facing personal physical danger, and going above and beyond of what your duty is. David had no duty to go when he was, just to set that scene up. David, once he realizes that he finally realizes that he has this knowledge where if he touches people, he can see their crimes, I guess you might say, their sin. And he walks through 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, and he's touching people, and he sees some kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. And then he sees this one person who has done a home invasion, and he's killed the parents, and he has the kids tied up. And David goes to that house in order to save the family. To me, what's heroic in that is that it's brave, that he's putting himself in personal danger. And secondly, that it's above and beyond what he has to do. He clearly doesn't have to do that, but he does it anyways. Like in a lot of ways, like a cop or a fireman, it's their duty to go into burning buildings. And this is a little controversial. I just wonder, that's to me what propels David to the next level. Because what if David is the greatest security guard on earth, in Philadelphia? Is that heroic? Because he has the talent, take away that he can rip cars apart, and he has clairvoyance. If he's just a superb security guard, does that just make him a hero in and of itself?
No, but I mean, he's more than just a security guard too. He's more than just a security guard, though, right?
In what way?
I mean, he does have superhuman.
No, but I'm saying
he doesn't have like super
beyond
Sorry,
that.
say that again.
No, I'm just saying beyond that, if he was just a security guard and he was a great security guard, saying that if he didn't have these superpowers, would you say that he's heroic?
Oh, as a security, no, I wouldn't say. No, I wouldn't say.
Even if he was a great security guard?
Was he the greatest security guard ever and created the concept of being a security guard? Then yes.
I mean, even back it down a notch, he won the Pennsylvania security guard of the year. Is that heroic? Because I think in a way, what would separate him from being the Mozart? Yeah, Mozart was a great musician, but there's been a lot of great musicians. Was he even the musician of a generation? I don't. Maybe, but there was a lot of great artists going on during that period. I guess that's, to me, what goes beyond exercising your talents to having, because we had even talked about this, that I'll agree that someone like Mozart or Michelangelo or somebody, they had superpowers, you might say, that their talent went beyond almost if you were looking at it at a standard distribution, they're way off on the right hand tail of it. That's a superpower, but are they superheroes for that? Are they even superhuman?
Well, I mean, I would say they are. For what you pointed out, like, they're so far off the spectrum of what typically is what is typical for a human being to accomplish, that they in some ways transcend humanity. And in many ways, kind of like a superhero does.
I mean, I kind of have trouble with the idea of superhuman, just because look at Usain Bolt, who lapped all the people in the Olympics with his running, and Michael Phelps, who who swam circles around the competition, or people probably be mad about this one, Tom Brady, who just clearly dominated his field. And there's people, you brought it up, artists, and sports is just what came to mind. Yeah, is superhuman, because in a lot of ways they're kind of jerky in other aspects of their life, or they're less than perfect in those areas. They just happen to excel in that one area. Maybe Tom Brady, I'll really get people mad out there. Maybe Tom Brady has exceeded that, and he is pretty awesome in other domains of his life. But is there really such a thing as a superhuman, or is that something that we want there to be, and so we create narratives that people are superhuman?
I mean, I would argue that it's something that is hardwired in our brain to create. We need heroes. We need superhumans. We need people that stand above the rest of humanity. Like, I get what I'm saying, is it's very, especially to modern ears, it's very kind of difficult to, I don't even comprehend, because we've lived in basically the world of the Enlightenment for how many years now?
I think I think you very much are onto something, is that the element of the miraculous, it gets very much, back in the day when you didn't have so much information, it was easier to see someone, you hear tell of this guy who is making almost heavenly music, or you see a picture that you just couldn't imagine that it was made by human hands. But in a world where information is so easily obtained, you can see the warts and all of people who are even extremely creative, extremely talented. You see what I'm saying?
No, I see what you're saying, and my argument would be, we were talking about the great man theory of history too, and I mean, generally speaking, a lot of these people that we consider great men were not. I mean, in a lot of ways, were monsters, which I guess gives us a little good segue to how you could argue that Mr. Glass can fall under this superhero heroic dichotomy, right?
Yeah, well, he's really, I mean, he's painted, and he is a supervillain in that he's causing these mass death events. An airplane crash, this plane crash, a hotel fire, and he's killing all of these people just to see if someone comes along. I mean, that's absolutely insane to think about, that he's just doing this on a hunch that there's got to be someone who's the opposite of him, that Elijah, Mr. Glass, is completely feeble, and that he looks the wrong way and he breaks bones. He thinks that there has to be an omega to his alpha. I mean, that's on the face of it. And when they start to reveal it, you think that this guy is just completely off his rocker.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of ways, I would argue that he is kind of completely off his rocker. He has this crazy theory, even just that superheroes are real, for one. And he also has this crazy theory that experiment where he's going to, cause all these accidents, and he'll end up finding the person that doesn't get hurt, and this is going to lend credence to his experiment. What I would argue too, though, is in the sense he fits under this category of great men / heroic, or part of the heroic pantheon, in the sense that Mr. Glass had this vision that he was going to prove that superheroes are real, and he was going to find his opposite. And in the process of this creative destruction, doing it, he does prove that to himself and to David. And we'll get into it later, like with the later movies, but he does prove that it is real, it does exist. And he forced this reality into he forced this idea into existence.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. I mean, in a way, in a totally cold way, how different is Elijah than other world leaders who have caused mass death and destruction because they thought it was for the betterment of humanity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use an example. We call him Peter the Great, but if you read about Peter the Great at the time that he lived in Russia, a lot of people didn't think he was all that great. Just take a look at how St. Petersburg was built.
Look at Mao in China with the Cultural Revolution. I mean, a lot of people died in that, but you could say, well, he's crazy. And I think that that's a thing that people will often just resort to, is that person's crazy. But in a way, are they acting internally rationally? And I think somebody like Mao or Stalin, or like you said, Peter the Great, their internal thought process was completely rational. It seems irrational to us because of the value that we put onto life. But in a lot of the way these people think it out is that, you got to crack some eggs to make an omelet. And they just think of those things in a very different way. And I think that that's really, in a lot of ways, the difference between the villain and the hero.
Yeah, and whereas, like, contrast. We'll use Mao, for example, right? He had this vision of a communist China, and which, before him, or let's just say, like, I don't know, 100 years before that, if you probably had gone around to China and talked about, like, oh, we have this great idea, it's called communism. Even just the word communism, people like, what are you talking about? They wouldn't have understood what you were talking about at all. And Mao had this vision that he was going to make China a communist society somewhat based on Leninist ideas, and he forced it through. Anyone could say anything they want about Mao and the people that did lead the communist revolution in China. These people were dedicated to this vision that seemed crazy not that long ago, not long before it actually happened. And the world has never been the same since.
Well, in a lot of ways, and I think you can tie Mr. Glass into people like Peter the Great and Mao and Stalin. And I mean, not to defend them in any way, but I think they all saw, and Elijah saw this, that to make the big jump into the next step, be it for Peter the Great into the Enlightenment revolution and to catch up with Europe because he felt they were so behind, and with Mao, with the Great Leap Forwards and getting China industrialized after being so agricultural and feudal in so many ways for centuries, a couple of centuries before that, and being dominated by outside powers, he felt that he was going to have to take some pretty drastic steps to bring his country into the next level of its evolution. And I think that Elijah was feeling that he had to take his drastic action to bring humanity to its next level of evolution.
Exactly. And I mean, in the process of his mass murder, he does do some good. I mean, he snaps David out of his depression by forcing David to confront that he is more than just human. He is a superhero. He saves David's marriage, which was on the rocks because of David's depression, because he was being distanced to his wife and kids and his kid. And he also saves the relationship with his child. And in the process, you could argue that Mr. Glass saved a lot of people. And this is something I picked up on the second time that I watched the movie, is when David finally accepts that he's a superhero and he goes into the subway station or a train stop. You're not exactly sure what it is, but it's a place, it's a central hub. A lot of people are walking through, and he just kind of has like people touch him. And we, as you pointed out, David can see the bad things that people have done by simply having them touch him, even just a glance, right? And I was thinking about this on the second time that I watched it. Well, he must have had this the entire time, and David was choosing not to act upon it.
Did you remember in that earlier scene when Mr. Glass goes to visit David while he's security guarding at the football game, and David pulls somebody out of line because he thinks he has a gun, and he says he just felt it. And I think for David, he didn't even know that was a superpower. It was just something that he felt. And I think that is something that we don't truly understand, and that science would have a very hard time making sense of, is people who have maybe perceptions. Again, I'm not saying that somebody has X-ray vision or they have telekinesis and can, give somebody a heart attack on the opposite side of the planet. But what if people could see maybe a little bit outside of the normal visual spectrum, or who can hear slightly different levels than anybody else can, or has just perceptions? That's something that's very difficult to measure. But man, would those people see the world in a very different way than you or I would.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, for sure. Like, they do legitimate scientific studies on this stuff, like telepathy, and how much can people read other people's brains. And at least from my understanding, there are certain people that do someone have an ability to read, like to click in on this other level. And I don't know how 100% accurate that it is, but this ability to actually, be able to read somebody's brain, their thoughts to a degree.
And those are really David's superpowers, is that he's indestructible. He can read people's minds, and that he has super strength. He also has as every superhero does, Elijah tells us that water can kill David. And you see that. I really noticed it more watching our next movie, which I won't give too much away, but and Shyamalan sets up these dichotomies between David, and the obvious is that David is indestructible. Glass can be broken. Mr. Glass, he's the type of person, he thinks of every single possibility. He's someone who could plan out anything, because it's more than just intelligence. It's being able to almost see into the future in a way.
Yeah. And in some ways, he's like I would say like Mr. Glass, if we were living in more of like a tribal society, he would be like a shaman.
Whereas David, he's almost just someone who reacts to the situation. He doesn't think it out, because if he thought it out more so, he would have seen what his real ability is. That's the one thing that maybe we could talk about, is I just didn't know if how much he was purposely repressing about what he knew about himself, and how much he didn't know about himself.
I've gone back and forth. I think he was purposely repressing a fair amount of it. Like in the subway tunnel, he, like, you see right off the bat, he can almost immediately see when people are the bad things that people have done in their lives. I think he had that the whole time, and I think that was part of what was leading to his depression. Was, well, I got to keep this a secret because nobody will understand if I make it public. Audrey won't understand, and I don't want to paint like a big red target on myself. I want to be left alone. But at the same time, I'm seeing these people that have done all these horrible things, and I'm not doing anything about it.
A good way, maybe to wrap up today, let's just take some overall thoughts about the movie. What did you think that this movie did particularly well?
To be honest with you, I loved the whole thing. I thought the music was great. I thought the way they filmed it was great too. It's a very serious film. It's very, just the way it's shot too. Like there's a lot of, it's like darker colors, and I know you really get a sense of like kind of living inside of David's depression. But the thing I enjoyed most about the film was, and as you guys can probably tell after listening to our conversation, is they took the subject matter seriously. I mean, this could have been done in your typical comic book movie kind of way, and it could have been done over the top, but it wasn't done that. Even Mr. Glass, who's, I guess, the more over the top flamboyant character in the movie, he's still grounded in reality. Mr. Glass is somebody I would probably, I think is eccentric, but I've met kind of weird people like Mr. Glass in my life.
What I really liked about the movie is M. Night Shyamalan. He either nails it or he just totally bombs out. Like so many of the movies he's done are so spot on, and then other ones, it just, whatever he was trying to get, he just didn't get it. And I think in this one, probably more so than any of his other movies, it was just absolutely spot on. It was a great action movie. It was thought-provoking. It had the twist, but the twist it didn't leave you spinning at the end. Everything that the movie did along the way set you up for the twist. And so I think that the twist was surprising at the end, but it wasn't shocking or cliche. It all came together and it made sense at the end.
And the twist is great too, because when you watch it on a second viewing, you see the hints throughout your second viewing. When Mr. Glass he literally talks about like, oh, what about the plane crash, and what about the apartment building going on fire? And if David was a little bit more perceptive, he might have put all three of these things together. And the second time you watch it, it's cool picking up all the little hints that you see that's going into that the direction that Mr. Glass was responsible for all of it.
I also loved with this movie that I saw it in 2000, and I've watched it several times, every couple of years in between then. Like I said, I'm probably up on well above 5 times watching this movie. You really get something new that you can pick out of it, that it's not one of these movies that once you know what the twist is at the end, that it's ruined for you. And I think for me, that's what makes it a movie to keep rewatching, is that you get more out of it each time you watch it. It's not like, now I know that like the Sixth Sense. Once you know that Donnie Wahlberg is dead, why would you ever watch the movie again? And that's another M. Night Shyamalan movie where the twist was spectacular, but it never gave you anything to really go and chew over again.
Yeah. And this movie too is also it's very emotionally moving, actually, for something that's I guess, a comic book movie, but it's not really a comic book movie because it's not based on a comic book movie. But the relationship between David and his son was extremely well done. The son viewing the dad as a superhero. I mean, and that rings true to real life too. How many, you grew up and you remember as a kid, you kind of saw your dad as a superhero. I just thought that was the relationship between David and his son was very well done. I thought it was very moving.
That's an interesting point to bring up, because I think with the son, like he desperately wanted his father to be the superhero, and David never presented himself as that. And I think that that's what really reconnected their relationship, is David just believing in himself.
Yeah, well, and getting over his believing in himself, yeah, and becoming who he was. And it's cliche, but people say that all the time. Like, be yourself and you'll be happier, and the people around you will be happier, and do what you feel like you were put on this earth to do. That's another theme of this that they really nailed in this movie too, was Mr. Glass has this line where, there's no I can't remember the exact line right now, but he basically says there's no worse feeling in this world than not knowing what your purpose is. And Mr. Glass finds his purpose in this world by, through his destruction and his mayhem, that he's going to be he's going to be the supervillain to David's superhero, and bringing forth this new reality into existence. And whereas David, he finds his purpose too, that he's finally accepts that he's more than just human, and he is a hero. He's the Superman.
To wrap up today, we're going to move through this entire series. It's a trilogy. And in the next one, let's not give away too much of the next episode, because I think you should definitely tune into that one. But we're going to talk about 2016 Split. And I think that it might be worth talking a little bit now, is that this was a trilogy that came out over the course of 20 years. And if you noticed in the beginning that Unbreakable came out in 2000, the year 2000, Split, which is nominally the sequel, didn't come out until 2016.
Yeah, it was, from my understanding, M. Night Shyamalan had this idea that it was going to be a trilogy right from the get-go. And there's a funny, I got a quote, actually, it was kind of funny. I'm not going to pull up the exact quote right now, but initially when he was selling Unbreakable, he was selling it to Disney, and Disney's like, oh, a comic book movie, like a comic books, like the guys that go to like the conventions, they're like, oh, that will never sell. It's just so like, it's just so funny. And initially, from my understanding, people were a little bit disappointed when Unbreakable came out, because I guess they were expecting something like The Sixth Sense. And from my understanding, it wasn't really, it was marketed as like a psychological thriller or psychological drama. It wasn't really marketed as a comic book movie.
Well, that's
a comic origin story.
I think that's interesting you bring it up, because I can remember specifically watching it. I think that was another thing that I thought was really masterful, is that you don't know that this is a comic book superhero movie until you start getting to the end and you're like, holy smokes, this is a superhero movie. It did not come out with that. It didn't beat you over the head with anything in this movie. Shyamalan gave you everything you needed to know, and it left it up for you to discover it.
Yeah. And I could be wrong, but I just remember at the time it wasn't as well received as they were hoping, I guess, because The Sixth Sense was such a smashing hit.
Yeah, I think The Sixth Sense only came out maybe a year or two before this, rather, and that Unbreakable was his next big feature film.
Yeah, and then leading up to Split, he had a couple of hits, and then he also had a bunch of stinkers in a row. And I guess he wanted to do something. He wanted to return to this universe that he, had a vision of doing like a trilogy of films. And yeah, I guess he got the green light for it, because I believe it was like a smaller budget film and smallish budget, and the studios weren't willing to take a super big risk with M. Night Shyamalan's recent track records of, box office bombs, and he saw an opportunity to get back into something that he really wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that really sets M. Night Shyamalan apart from a lot of other directors, because I think in a lot of ways, the things that he's done, when he's done them well, put him head and shoulders above a lot of other really big name directors. But man, when he blows it, they're bad.
Oh, yeah. But that's kind of what I like about him, too, though, is the fact that he's willing to take these big swings, and sometimes it works brilliantly, and other times it doesn't. But I've watched almost all of his movies, I think. Some of them I like, some of them I don't like, and some of them like this one. I'm surprised. I should have watched it when it first came out, like you did, because I absolutely love this movie. I love this trilogy. It was a brilliant suggestion on your half, because I had never watched any of these movies before, and I absolutely love them. I think this is like one of the best trilogies I've seen, I guess Hollywood put out.
Yeah, he made some ones like The Happening that were just not good movies. The Lady in the Water, which was really bad. And I think he couldn't quite capture that his classical ending that he does, where it shocks you, wherein when he does get that done, like he did in Unbreakable, it is really good. I think when we get to Split, we'll see that he does that ending, and it's a surprise, but it's a soft surprise, I guess you might say, a soft landing.
It's yeah, and it's funny with Split. I'm not giving too much away, but initially when Split was marketed, there was no mention of Unbreakable at all. It was just marketed as, M. Night Shyamalan's new movie about some guy that with split personality. And from my understanding, people who initially saw the film were like kind of blown away that it tied into the whole universe.
Yeah, let's leave it at that, because I think people are really you're going to really enjoy this next one, Split. So we will definitely talk to you about that next time.